Hello, everyone. I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about and really think through the language behind our motivation. As many of you know, and you've heard this probably from me, from other people in the past, what we say matters. Our language matters. And in particular, when it comes to our motivations, our goals, the expectations that we put on ourselves, it's incredibly important that we get a better handle on the language that we're using and the power behind that language and either creating that authentic lifestyle that we're thriving for or longing for, or leading us back into that performance lifestyle. So before we go into this, remember, motivation is the readiness to change and the willingness to enact the behaviors necessary for that change to occur. So motivation really has to do with this internal readiness, this cognitive awareness, this emotional readiness, and then the willingness to actually put those thoughts and feelings into behaviors, the implementation phase. So why does language matter when it comes to this? Why is it important for us to be thinking about how we talk about our motivations? If I say I want to change the way I eat or change the way I take care of my body, or I want to implement some different behaviors, why do I need to question that? Isn't that good? Well, the problem is, in many instances, the language that's guiding us, or if we look at the language that we use to describe why we're making that change, or maybe some of the thoughts that are happening around that change, we'll notice very specifically that the motivation that we have is actually not self-derived. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more in a few slides. But if our motivation is not coming from an internal place, or it's not rooted within us, it's going to lead us into one of two options. One, either we, again, continue down this performance strategy, doing things based on what we expect we're supposed to do or we think others want us to do. Or two, it breeds resentment, and it's often going to lead to a backlash in our behaviors, as well as our thoughts and our feelings, bringing us back to this place that we currently are, if not steps backwards, so that the way that we're engaging or the behaviors that we're doing are even further from maybe where we thought we wanted to go. So the way that I like to explain this is looking at internal versus external motivation. Our goal is to have internal motivation. What that means is that we are really driving our interest, our value, our energy to make this change or to do the things that we want to do in life from an internal place. They might have some influence from other people. Maybe we've seen what others have done. We feel empowered or motivated, but the root is for ourselves. We're not doing this for anybody else. We're not doing this for the celebration or the praise, or because we feel like we need to do this in order to be good enough for others. On the other hand, that external motivation is pretty much just the opposite. It's feeling this pressure like we need to do these things in order to be, quote, okay. So if you look on the outline, we're going from external to internal, and the box on the bottom is actually describing the language that we're using, and these are those word cues that we're going to be able to look at and know the language that we're using, whether or not our motivations are defined by external or internal resources. So from that external side, the most externally motivated we can be is when we do things based off of shoulds, musts, supposed tos, anything where we go, I really should quit smoking. I really should work out more. I really should call so-and-so. I have to leave my job, or I know I really shouldn't be in a relationship where somebody treats me that way. Every time that we use those words, even if we have some buy-in or belief around it, we're anchoring towards a judgment based on either an assumption of what we think others are feeling or thinking or expecting of us, or really the ultimate expectations that are being put on us. I should go to college. I should become a doctor. I should be married. I should have kids. So when you think about this, if any time that you're describing a change that you want to make, it's led with or backed up by should, supposed tos, or musts, that is an automatic red flag that the reason that you are doing these things has to do with external motivations. And again, even if there's some rooting internally, it is not enough to keep you moving forward. And then if we kind of go into the next sort of subtle transition where it's a little bit harder to pick up on, it's when we say things like, we need to. If you ask a follow-up question to yourself or anyone else that says, I really need to do blank, 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 usually those follow-up points are going to be all rooted again in expectation or external buy-in measures. Well, because I would be happier, I would be healthier, things would be blank. Whatever we fill in that with, it's saying we really need to do those things. We know, okay, I have a little bit more buy-in to do it, but the pressure is again still really coming from that external piece. Now, the problem with both of these, the shoulds, musts, and supposed tos, as well as the need tos, is they all perpetuate our shame. So if you haven't taken a look at and kind of gone deeper into shame, there's a lot of resources that are available to look at this. But the biggest key here is that it's perpetuating this belief that if we don't do these things or we don't act a certain way, there's a threat to our connection, belonging, and value in the world. So again, doing things based off of this or functioning off of these belief systems just perpetuate the need to keep doing that. And then we're going to transition to the other side. So the positive, or when you know that the change that you're wanting to make is actually rooted in that internal value system, in that internal anchoring, is when we say things like, I really want to do blank, or I'm going to do blank. The reason these two things are really driven from an internal perspective, the want might seem a little bit easier, right? I want to do this because it's important to me, it's valuable to me, or I'm excited about the outcome that could happen. And then I'm going to, what that means is you've actually internalized all of those different components, and maybe there is still some initial anchoring that came from external feedback, but you have really thought about and implemented this change into your core of self. I'm going to go to the store today. I'm going to start making, I have no idea why this popped into my head, but I started making my own yogurt. I'm going to start making my own yogurt versus buying it. I'm going to start calling people more. Whatever that might be, we've already started to write the story as if it's integrated into our tapestry, into our everyday lives. And so it really shows that we're building that momentum and we've done the work internally to get to where we want to go. So if you think about this, right, again, all of these things are starting to lay the foundation of why it might be important. But again, I want to reiterate, what is the impact if we're leading from external versus internal language? If I'm leading from an external place, what that means to me is that I am doing this for other people, or the belief in my shame narrative that if I don't do these things, I will be lesser, my threat to connection in the world will be higher. And so I have to do these things to please other people or to fit into somebody else's matrix. On the other hand, when I can lean into what do I actually want to do? What am I willing to do? What am I going to do? That can create a stronger system of rooting, a sense of self-efficacy. It drives us to continue to be who we want to be. And again, that might still align with those around us, but we're not leading with that. We're not assuming that it needs to be done for these other people in order to prove our worthiness and value. So at this point, a lot of times people are saying, okay, well, I clearly do a lot of shoulding and musting and supposed toing all over myself. I tell myself, I think that's one of the funniest thing. I don't even know where it came from, where people say stop shoulding on yourself, mostly because everybody laughs when they think that they're, swearing or getting away with something bad. But the idea is that pretty much all of us can identify that we do a lot of that in our everyday life. And so we really want to think about, okay, what can we do with this? Great, you're telling me that maybe my motivations aren't super helpful, and I don't really know how to shift that, because our brains are on autopilot. Our brains do things based off of these different feelings and pressures all the time, and sometimes not even consciously. So the first thing, and there's tons of resources around here. If you are in the membership portal, you can access the Stages of Change worksheet, the Motivations for Change worksheet. You can access all of this information that I have, again, in the AR member portal. Otherwise, if you are looking at this on your own, you can go and Google some of these pieces, you can learn more, or you can join the AR membership group and you can learn a little bit more about this and make some connections with community members to support you in making these changes. So the first part is to really think through, what stage of change am I at? Well, and all of these changes, there's again explanations. If you're in the portal, you'll have a whole bunch of resources on this. But what you really want to look at is, how ready and willing am I to make these changes? Again, looking at our motivation, we're assessing readiness and willingness at all points. So first off, really getting in touch with and answering for yourself, am I ready to make this change? Do I want to make this change? Have I even thought that this change would be beneficial? Or is my motivation to do this thing actually anchored in anything that I have buy-in for or believe in? The second thing is to get clear on your why. Your why is really your values. So really getting to know, what are your values, and then anchoring everything that you want to do, everything that you are preparing for, in line with your values. If it doesn't connect back to your values, which is your primary source of your root system, you are not going to have sustainable change. If I want to do something, I have to be able to connect to it with something that is bigger than just, oh, I'll save a little bit of money, or it's the right thing to do, or I know I could be healthier. We need to describe it in a way that really creates that, okay, yes, this is why it is an integral part of the things that I want to do, and I'm willing to work through the distress around whatever that change is, or to put the work in to get to where I need to go, because I believe in it based on how it connects to my why. The next part is to then look at, okay, what are the pros and cons to changing or sustaining your behavior? Again, as we're thinking about our motivations, we have to get clear on the arguments we're making on both sides. This is going to be a key place where you're also going to notice more of that internal versus external language use. What is motivating you for the change versus motivating you to sustain? There's a worksheet in the AR member portal that actually walks you through how to do this. If you're not yet a member, again, maybe you want to join our membership group and access some of this information. Otherwise, you can go ahead and just create your own chart and your pro and con list and kind of start thinking about it on your own as well. But the key here again is to notice what would be pushing you in both directions, to make the change or to implement the new behavior, to do the work, whatever it is that you're trying to get motivation for, and what's going to get in the way of that, i.e., what is the sparkling, shiny pieces that are making you think, oh, sustaining might be okay. Or maybe I'm not ready to do this. Because again, the more we get clear on these two pieces, the more we can tie that in line with our stage of change or our stage of readiness. And then again, go back and look at how all of this connects to our whys and really getting clear on that. Once you've done all of these pieces, then it's really about creating and preparing for what you want to do. And this is where I talk a lot about the balance between insight and action. We are making a change, and that change, or that long-term sustained growth that we want to see happen, is more than just I'm jumping in and doing it. We have to build the insight. That is what I'm asking you to do in these first few steps. Build the insight into why this is important to you and how you're going to anchor to it so that you can create a plan to manage the distress that's going to come up with any changes, any implementation, any feedback or pushback that you get either internally or externally. And you can really start to walk through and put together a plan for long-term sustainable success. Now, what's key in this is to focus your plan on incremental changes. And I talk a lot about this idea of what is a 1% change? Okay, you're here right now. You want to get to this point. What would it look like if there was a 1% change in that direction? If we're going real big, maybe 5%, but I don't exceed 5% when I'm talking to people and or making this plan for myself. Why? Because if we focus on too big of a change or we ask our brain to shift too quickly, it's likely going to backslide on us because we haven't yet built momentum or created the brain pathways and automations and all the other complex neurobiological things that go into behavior change and modifications and all of these pieces. We haven't given our brain time to catch up or to build that pathway with us. And so again, we're going to run into some issues and then backslide. So what we really want to focus on is those small, sustainable changes, because again, we're creating lifestyles, not looking at all or nothings and needing to be overnight successes, or I guess a different person overnight. Now, throughout this whole process, the key piece is to constantly keep coming back to your why. Again, what are your values? How is this anchoring on your why? Ask yourself this repeatedly. You're going to have different elements of stress and distress. And as you're going through that, it's really important that we use our whys as our leverage points to keep going, to walk through this. This is also going to be key when you start to think about those 1% and 5% changes, is really thinking about, how does that change connect? Okay, once I'm here and I've integrated this, I am more in line with this part of my values. Well, how does this next 1% or 5% change really factor in? And we focus a lot then on, again, continuously planting seeds and establishing roots that we're going to buy into regardless of the pushback or feedback that we get. And then 2 other things that I think are just key throughout any process of change is, 1, to be flexible. So it's important to realize that you might be in a stage of motivation that says, oh, I'm in preparation mode, or I'm in action mode and I'm ready to go. And something happens and it pushes you back to contemplation, or it pushes you back to a stage of unreadiness, or you go from an internal motivation point to suddenly external motivation and it's pulling you in a different direction. Those things are okay. They make you human. They mean that you are just another product of that pressure and that shame-based society and sort of culturally driven norms that sometimes don't really serve us. It's not helpful for you to beat yourself up about it, to say this should have been a certain way. Why didn't this happen? Because again, all you're doing is rooting a failure into some ridiculous expectation. See the barriers, the failures, the flops, see all of those things as opportunities just to keep learning. Because again, the focus in anything we're doing is long-term sustainable change. So if we aren't able to be flexible and aren't able to work through this, we're never going to be able to create a system that integrates into our life as a whole. And then lastly, we need to celebrate. We need to celebrate every time we make those small shifts and changes. Every time that we identify, oh, I'm doing this for so-and-so. I'm doing this because I feel like I have to. We might not be ready to do anything once we know that, and that insight is incredibly important. Naming that is important, and it's worth celebrating. It might be then when we take that first step and we start to make a plan, or we make a phone call, or we sign up for whatever the thing is we're doing. Those steps are all incredibly important to celebrate, because again, as many times as we're going to have barriers, flops, failures, whatever you want to call it, we're going to have that many, if not more, celebration points. And even in those moments of a failure, it is something to celebrate because we now have new data. We can learn something more about ourselves and the things we want to do. So as you go through all of this, remember, language matters. What we say matters. And it is incredibly important, if you want to create the lifestyle that you want, that we are only rooting those changes and those planning behaviors into internally rooted motivations. And if you feel more stuck, you have questions, you had some aha moments that came out of this video, or as you work through some of these next steps, please comment below, email me, let me know how I can support you. I am always in your corner wanting to help make sure that you have exactly what you need to live the life that you want to and to truly thrive within it.